Hi, thanks so much for joining me for this session. My name is Rhea Davis, and I am an education consultant with GE Healthcare. During this session, we are going to do a deep dive into the new prescription refill workflow in CPS 12.2. Now, this is a big change in this newest release that we have, and there's a lot of exciting change around it, but that also means some big impact to workflows. So the intention of this session is not to necessarily be a how-to, what's new with the form, but just a more easy look, a more relaxed look at what this workflow change is going to look like for you and how some tips and tricks of how you could manage this within your practice. So while we have on the screen right now an agenda, I'm going to call this a loose agenda. These are really going to be more of our session goals, some things that we're going to review. The new RX Renewals tab, and we'll take a look at the workflow there. We'll also take a look at some key highlights of the prescriptions form component and do a little deeper dive into what that really looks like, how it's behaving, how it performs, and the output of this particular form. We'll also take a look at workflow examples for the pharmacy, and we'll also take a look at workflow examples that are coming in from a patient-requested medication refill. We'll also throw in a workflow example for EPCS. And EPCS is electronic prescribing of controlled substances. So that's something that's new for CPS 12.2 is the ability to prescribe controlled substances electronically. So that's a really exciting change for us in CPS 12.2. And then we'll conclude the session and wrap things up. Down on the bottom right-hand corner, though, of this slide, I want you to take note of two resources. The first one is CPS 12.2 Education Resources, and that link will take you to our Engage site, and we have a running list of educational resources specific to CPS 12.2. So take note of that. In that area, you will see links out to webinars, videos for everything that's new in CPS 12.2, not just this prescription workflow. Also, I want you to have in your hands the What's New in Centricity Practice Solution version 12.2 release notes, and that is also linked here, and it is also in our CPS 12.2 Education Resources document. So with this, we're going to spend most of our time within the application itself. So why don't we just go ahead and get started and take a look at CPS 12.2. So this should be very familiar to you. This is CPS 12.2. Not much has changed here with this area, except for some components here on the left-hand navigation side. So in CPS 12.2, this new prescriptions workflow has a new home. So let's first start talking about where we started in previous versions. So in a previous version of Centricity Practice Solution, a delegate could act on the behalf of a prescriber. So in the ESM console, we could set up a specific user or a group of users, or in some cases, even a proxy user that multiple people accessed and would address prescription refills one by one as they came in here in the documents area. In this documents area, we can change and view documents to different providers. So I'm logged in as myself. You can see that up here at the top right. And here in this documents area, I could change it and say, I just want to focus on my prescription refills. So in this example, we can see the prescription refill here for Vicodin and the medication information here down below. From this point, I can open up the document and sign it and address it directly from the patient chart or from here in this documents area. The concept of this has been moved. So we are taking the initiation of this workflow and placing it here in this tab called RX Renewals. So you will still see routing of documents coming into prescribers. That workflow isn't going to change, and we'll get there, but this is not where this workflow will initiate. So when a new prescription request is coming in from the pharmacy, all of those requests are now going to go to RX renewals. So when I select this area, this is where everything comes in regarding medications. So if I have a prescription renewal request that's coming in from SureScripts, I will no longer receive a document. I will need to come here to RX renewals and address it. So there's a couple of different options that we have in this new area. If I am the prescriber and I'm going to initiate and address all of my prescription renewals on my own, you can see again, I'm logged in here. And over here in this area, just like what we had with documents, I am logged in, so I'm viewing my own prescription renewals for my own patients. If you have a delegate workflow, just like what we saw with documents, where I can change my document view from me to someone else, I have that ability also in RX renewals. So this first area that we're going to focus on is changing the name of who we're looking at. So this name is based on the authorizing provider for the drug that went out the door for the patient that's listed here. So when I select the magnifying glass, I can easily search by provider last name. So last name starts with, and I'm going to take a look at C. Ping Lee. So I make that selection and press OK. Now I am looking at C. Ping Lee's renewal requests and their pending renewals. And as the delegate for C. Ping Lee, I can take action on all of these patients. And we'll get to that in just a second. But in terms of the searching for a provider here, there is no drop down like we're used to seeing. But this area is one component of concern that we have heard from customers that they would like to have enhanced. So we will talk about a couple of enhancements throughout this session. This is one area that we'd like to see behave more like what we see in documents and alerts and flags, where we can have perhaps an RX refill doctors and then either view all members or just view a specific member. So how do we sort of mimic what we see here as like the RX refill doctors in this RX renewals area? My suggestion for you, if you are working as a delegate for even one provider or multiple providers, is to create a new folder in your My Folders. Now, this concept is not new to CPS12 2, and this may be a concept that you already use to route documents or to route alerts and flags quickly to a group of users. And so the concept will be the same here. I'll show you an example that we already have started. Here under My Folder, I have a group that's called RX Refill Doctors. So if you've never actually utilized this functionality before, I'll show you how to do that. So by selecting More, I can select a new group. So I'm going to select a new group called RIA's RX Docs. And I'll select OK. So you can see the contents of the drop-down list. I selected My Folder, and I have this listed here. So right now, it's empty. If I come over here and do my search, I can search and add one by one, or if I know users that I'd like to add in there, I can search for their names. This is a one-time setup. So I can say C. Ping Lee, add item to RIA's RX Docs. I can also search for another one. And I'm also going to add that item to RIA's RX Docs. And now in my Folder, I'm going to lessen the search that I have to do if I am acting as a delegate for multiple providers. So within this area now, I have narrowed this down. I can simply select the magnifying glass. I'll come in here to RIA's RX Doctors, select my provider, and say OK. So it's a relatively simple thing. Now that it's set up, I can select the magnifying glass. I've got my providers that I'm responsible for listed here, and I can select OK and move relatively quickly between different prescribers. So that may be a tip for you if you are a delegate. Let's go back to my own prescription renewals that are listed here. So let's take a closer look at this RX renewals area, at all of the features of it. The first thing that we'll take a look at is this icon here that says refresh data. By selecting that, it's manually refreshing this data within this area. We also have an area here called requested date. And if I select this, notice that there is a down arrow, and we can sort in descending or ascending order. The same is going to be true here in the patient name. So the patient name I can search either in ascending or descending order as well, and notice that that arrow moves based on my selections. One thing to talk about in this requested date area, you will see different dates based on the date that the pharmacy is requesting this particular medication be refilled. There are some other components that we could see within this as well. This other date, like a requested date here, you can see this particular patient. We'll get to the different action icons, but I can tell that this patient has an outstanding office visit or some other internal initiated medication request that is not yet signed. And that date is the date that the document was started, or the date of basically the date of service. This column, we do see the patient name, so last name, comma, first name. And off to this side, we have the birth date. Now, you might say, okay, in my system, I'm seeing something different. I am seeing N/A, and you would be correct. I am in a new version of our product, and the reason I wanted to utilize this particular system and not the same exact one that you have is to show you that we're making progress on things that we're hearing from customers. So a little bit of background on how we got to this point. The RX renewals component and the theory behind it and the design was made with our GE engineering team and product management team, and also a large group of customers that gave feedback, constant feedback onto the design on what they wanted to see and their workflows. So our product managers and our engineering teams took all of that information and came up with the design that you see in your product today. We also went through a multi-level limited availability process with this particular release. And these customers also had essentially the same feedback, that the birth date in this area was not something that they necessarily needed to see, so it remained as N/A as you see it today. However, when we go live and we go to general availability, obviously the product gets put out to our entire install base, and when we hear things from the install base loudly, like the birth date, that was something that as a whole the install base didn't like. So what you're seeing today in the birth date field of NA will evolve eventually in a future service pack. So I wanted to show you that these are things that we're working on. We are listening to what you have to say as far as our workflows are concerned, and we are seeing progress already in our engineering versions of the product. So the birth date will only be shown if you have something called a mismatch, which is also something I will get to in just a moment. The next column, though, that we see is new. You see two columns with numbers, new and pending. So let's talk about the difference between new and pending. In the new column, any request that is coming in from a pharmacy will be listed in the new column. So you can see that for Rhea Davis Jr., there are two prescriptions that are coming in from SureScripts that says a pharmacy has requested this patient have 2 refills. You can see for Amy Sebesta that she has 3, and then for the rest of the lot here, we can see those numbers as well. The pending column is for internal initiated medications. So what I mean by that is that a document is likely already in progress that has a change to a medication. So if I go to Rhea Davis Jr., because she has 2 and 1, when I open her chart by clicking that white action icon, you can see that she has an open document that is a prescription refill. You can also see this brand new icon that we have in CPS12 too that looks like a prescription bottle. And if I hover over it, it says, has pending prescriptions. So it's giving us some information that says we don't necessarily need to start a new prescription refill because there's something that's already pending. That icon, or that area in our renewal area, this pending, may also show a 0 in the new, but only a number in the pending. If that's the case, our action icon only says that you can open the chart. So in this example, let's take a look. When I open the patient's chart, I would expect to see something like an office visit, and yep, that's exactly what we see. So I can see an office visit that's open, and the reason I say it's an office visit rather than a prescription refill is because I'm going to assume that there was a change made internally. There's no request coming in from the pharmacy, so that pending just means that we have a document that's open that has a medication change. So we can see over here in the document area that we have a medication change because I can see that with the clinical list lock. So the clinical list lock that's here identified in blue, and then also with that asterisk. We're going to talk a little bit more about clinical list locks during this session too, but wanted to point that out here at the very beginning. So let's talk more about these action icons. If I hover over any of the icons that we see, we can see that this white icon says to open the chart. The black icon is to start a renewal document. And so this is where our renewal process is initiated. So remember we talked about the documents area and how documents would immediately come in to the delegate's desktop or to the prescriber's desktop, however you have it set up, and would already be ready to go for you. In this new workflow, we are actually starting that process, which means that when we end up routing the document to a prescriber, that document is really ready to go. So that's one workflow benefit of having everything here. We don't have an open document in the patient's chart just yet, not until we actually start the renewal document. So we'll take a look at Amy Sebesta because I do see that she has 3 new prescription renewal requests and nothing that's pending. So this is our most straightforward one that we can take a look at and utilize this start renewal document. I can bypass opening up her chart. It's actually going to take me right in to our new prescriptions form component. So if you haven't seen this before, let's take a closer look at what we're actually looking at. So if this patient did have a photo, it would be listed up here. And when we go into a couple other patients, you'll see some photos. You'll also see the patient's sex, their age, their date of birth, and then if they have a signed height and weight from vitals, then that would also be listed here in the patient banner. You can see some other things up here, the outgoing authorizing provider, and then in administration, if this particular provider has an outgoing supervising provider, then that's also listed here in this banner. This banner is not editable, so it is not like the banner that's in the chart itself. This is within the form component, and it cannot be changed. A couple of other key highlights here. On the left-hand side, we see the patient's current pharmacy. We can see active medications that are listed here, the active medication list. And then we also see some action buttons across the top. So if we select an action button, it's going to call some of our historical dialog boxes. So this hasn't changed. I can still select a medication and press change or remove directly from here, as I always have. I can view inactive medications. So based on previous signed documents, we can view inactive medications. We can view the patient's active problem list. We can also view what allergies the patient has. And then a great new addition to this form, too, is the ability directly to view previous appointments and next appointments. Now, one thing I do want to point out here is that the View Appointments button is only going to show whatever last appointment the patient has. So if you happen to have a multi-specialty clinic and you've got lots of providers that might be working with this particular patient, whoever they saw last is going to be listed here. Whoever they're going to see next is going to be listed here. So there's no filtering here as of yet, but I just want to point that out as to how that is working as designed currently, but this is something that we've heard we'd like to see some enhancement around. So perhaps that's something we'll see in the future, but right now it just shows the last and next appointment. Here in the interactions area, this will change colors. So if there's a minor interaction or a major interaction, it will warn you with colors. So that iconography will change. The colors will change with red and yellow, orange colors. I can also select view interactions, and if I haven't already done the override, I can do that directly from here. We also see something here with the formulary. So the formulary checking, especially with a prescription that is being initiated from the RX Renewals tab, the formulary checking is going to happen right when we start the document. So this is not a change in behavior at all. I just want to explain how it works. If we schedule a patient, and we have the patient scheduled at least the day before they are coming in, when overnight eligibility and formulary checking happens. However, when the patient isn't scheduled, formulary checking begins as the second that we press OK to start this new document. So eligibility is happening in the background. We can even go ahead and select this and view all of the patient's pharmacy benefit eligibility. This looks exactly the same as it has in other areas of the application as well. We just put it here towards the front so that you don't have to do several clicks to get to that area. And once formulary checking comes back, it will turn green and say OK. So a couple of other things to talk about with this form. In the middle, because we started this document from the RX Renewals area, you can see in the middle of the screen that I didn't have to make any clicks. I didn't have to make any sort of change in order for these 3 prescriptions to come in. So this workflow has been streamlined. So I'm not making any sort of change to make this happen or selecting yes, renew, renew, renew. These are all coming in from the pharmacy. So a couple of things I want you to take notice of. The first is the pharmacy that's making the request is listed here. We can see a couple of different icons as well. So hovering over each of the icons tells us what those mean. So this means that this is an electronic request, so the prescription method is electronic. We can see that this is currently off formulary, so these will change colors as well. You can see the name of the drug and all of the strength. We can select if something is going to be brand medically necessary or not. We also see the SIG, the quantity. We can see the refills. And if there is any change between what the pharmacy has versus what we have, things will be highlighted. You may also see some other icons here, like red question marks with a circle around them, and all of those are explained in the release notes. You can also hover over icons to tell you exactly what those are. If there is any difference between what you have and what the pharmacy has, you can certainly edit the prescription to make any sort of change. So if I edit this particular prescription and say, I would like to have 6 refills instead of the 1, we can certainly make that change by selecting that edit icon. In this edit area, you can also edit instructions. So I can put my name in here, just as a test. There's an area for comments. This is not sent to the pharmacy. It just stays here in Centricity, or you could send a note over to the pharmacy. And because it's December, we can tell them happy holidays. In here, you can also have the prescribing method. You can change this if you prefer to not send it electronically. You can do any of the methods that are listed here. This should look familiar to you because it is something that is existing in your current version today. You can also change the state and the authorizing provider of this document. And by pressing save, we can see that we have a prescription here that has the quantity of 30, and then we changed the 1 to a 6. You can also see what we had written as our note to the pharmacy, which is listed here. A couple of other things to take note of. Whenever anything is being requested by the pharmacy, on the right-hand side, you will always see 3 icons. If I manually renew something by coming over here to active medications, and I know she already has Allegra, but I'm going to just press renew for the sake of the example. When I have a manual renew, notice that only 2 icons show up. So I've got the edit icon and then an ignore icon. The ignore icon still exists for anything that's coming in electronically. So we have the ability to just say, I would like to save this for later, or perhaps it is for a prescriber that we're not authorized to work on their behalf. We can save it for later, and we will ignore that request for the time being. However, if something is coming over from the pharmacy, there is one added icon, which is deny renewal. And when I select deny renewal, these denied requests should also be familiar to you because it's part of the old prescription refill workflow as well. But if we need to deny the request for any reason, we can select things like patient needs to contact me, or it's too soon to refill the medication, or I wasn't the one who prescribed this medication. So any of the things that are listed here, then we can select deny request. And as soon as you do that, you'll see this denied and then the reason. So this blue italic font tells you that this is going to be sent to the pharmacy, but it's not really a renewal. We are denying the renewal. So that's the difference in what we're seeing here anytime you see that blue italic font. So we do see that we have 2 of the same medications here. So I'm, for the sake of the example, going to just ignore it. So ignoring it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not going to come back to haunt me later, right? I still need to address it. I have to make some sort of action since it's coming in from the pharmacy. But right now I'm just going to address these 2. So let's take a look at the text translation. So I want you to take a look at the difference here. So the prescriptions form component is in brackets. If we have another form component, let's say we include HPI, we'll do HPI CCC. Just going to add this in for the sake of the example here. But HPI CCC only has one component. It's in green here. We see the bracket here. Its text translation is married to it. It lives with it. It lives within the form component. For prescriptions, we have something called a text translation that is outside of the form component. And you may say, why in the world did we do this? It's really for speed. So by taking the text outside of the prescription form component, it makes this form perform faster. So it is married to each other. If you insert this into a document template, the text translation will come with it. But if I double click in this red area, notice that I'm going to get this expression that says basically you can't open it. So if I want to go back into the prescriptions form, I can either hit forms or double click on the prescription. So I just want to point that out, that is intentional in order to make the prescriptions form work a little bit faster. Okay, so in terms of what we just performed in the prescription area, we have the Oxy that's listed in the middle. And then on the Allegra area, I want you to take a look at this. Denied. I did not prescribe this medication. So anytime you deny a request for a prescription refill, it will show up under medications, but we need to take a look for this in the very beginning, denied, and then the reason. So that's what's happening in the text translation itself. So going back into the form, we can see that denied, I did not prescribe this medication. So one thing we talked about at the very beginning was EPCS, which is electronic prescribing for controlled substances. And we do have the ability to do that in 12.2, and you can see here that Oxy is a controlled substance. So the DEA has some pretty strict requirements about controlled substances, one of which is enrollment, and another is something called two-factor authentication. So you can see here down at the bottom, whenever we've got a controlled substance, it says something about the two-factor authentication. So the DEA does require that we have a checkbox here that says that we have acknowledged that this is a controlled substance. So two-factor authentication will happen as soon as we attempt to sign this prescription. So just like our orders or anything else that we attempt to sign, we have essentially 3 different ways that we can sign medications. I can either within the form say sign RX now, or I can simply end and hold the document with signing clinical list changes, or I can end and sign the document. As soon as I choose sign the document, I have this renew electronic prescriptions that is required to pop up. I'm going to select this controlled substance acknowledgement, and then I'm going to complete the prescription review. If there is a controlled substance that you are renewing, then you do have to enter something called two-factor authentication. So EPCS requires the prescriber, so the authorizing provider, to enter 2 forms of authentication. So there's a lot of protection around this particular component. So this is a new feature in 12.2 that if you sign up and get enrolled with EPCS, that will occur for you. So this two-factor authentication will only pop up if there's a controlled substance. So a two-factor authentication is something like a token. So you see here, enter a token passcode. And the token right now for me is a small thing that I have on my keychain. And when I select a button on it, it has 6 digits. And those 6 digits change about every 20 seconds. So some of you may have a fob like this if you utilize VPN access into your computer. You may have a key fob that does essentially the same thing. So two-factor authentication can be something that you have, like the token, something that you are, like a fingerprint, so that's biometrics, or something that you know, which is something like a password. So we have to basically choose 2 things. And in this case, I have my token, so it's asking for the token password. So I will enter that now. And I can hit enter or utilize that button. And then the next thing it's asking for is the network password. And the network password is simply your Centricity password. So I am going to first initially enter this in incorrectly. And if I do, it says, nope, try again. So I'm forced then to go back and enter my token password again. And at this point, it has already changed. And then enter my Centricity password. And the controlled substance and the non-controlled substance have gone out for prescription renewal. So in that case, we're done with that, and we can go back to our chart desktop and take a look at our renewals. Now, one thing you notice is that Amy Sebesta, who we just worked, is still here on our RX renewal area, because remember, she had a total at the beginning of 3 renewals. We ignored one, and I told you that it's going to come back to you. It doesn't go away. It just says we don't want to address this just this second. So she's going to stay here on our RX renewals area. We don't lose track of that one extra renewal. We can address that at a different time. So let's take a look at a different example. Patient Rhea Davis Jr. has 2 that are new and 1 medication that's pending. So anytime I see a number here in the new area and a number in pending, I would never hit this button. And you may say, why would you not want to do that? Remember the clinical list lock. So anytime we are going to initiate the prescriptions form component and we have a renewal, that means there is a clinical list lock. Clinical list locks happen for things, let's go to the patient chart, we'll take a look. For things that you see on the summary screen, that's the easiest way to take a look at that. Things like problems, medications, allergies, directives, also orders will initiate a clinical list lock. Immunization forms will initiate the clinical list lock. In 12.2, the family history form will initiate a clinical list lock because it has SNOMED codes in the background. So basically things that are updating these key components in the background or in the application are going to initiate a lock because Centricity is constantly looking at the patient's chart for safety and for continuity and for the integrity of the chart to be whole. So if we've got 2 different documents that are updating these key sensitive components, then it will not allow us to do those functions independently. They have to be done either in the same document or we need to end or sign the clinical list changes of another document before we attempt to do that. So in Rhea Davis's chart here, you can see that there is a prescription refill request that's already open, and that does have a clinical list lock on it. And this is one component where we have heard from customers that this is causing some pain points. But what Centricity is doing, again, is attempting to keep the integrity of the patient's chart. So it says, for medications in particular, if you update, let's say, the patient's problem list in another document, and what happens if the problem list, this new problem that you have added, interacts with the medication that you're attempting to refill? What happens if we update the medication list in another document and we have an outstanding prescription request for a medication that interacts with this new medication that you're prescribing for the patient? So in order to ensure patient safety, that is the reason why the prescription refill form has a clinical list lock. So anytime, this holds true for any document that has a clinical list lock, anytime you attempt to update a new document with problems, medications, allergies, directives, orders, then it will tell you there's a clinical list lock. So as an example, if I have this prescription refill that's outstanding and I select new document, let's say the patient now comes in for an office visit, I'll select this V9 update. This is not going to prohibit me from entering things like the patient's history. So I can enter text data, I can continue to move through and enter things like vital signs, I can enter things that are just simple observation terms. But when I attempt to try to add something like a problem, I will get a warning. And you can see that it says that the document RX refill has changes that are unsigned. So that is one very important thing to know about the new prescriptions workflow, is that it does initiate a clinical list lock. And that's a change from previous workflows. So this is very sensitive for some groups that have clinicians that may not address prescription refills on the same day or very quickly, simply based on scheduling or general workflow in the group. So it's something to keep in mind that basically by initiating the prescription refill, you are putting a clinical list lock on the patient's chart. Okay, so just as a refresher, because I kind of went off on a minor tangent there, we've got 2 in new and 1 in pending. So when I go back to Rhea Davis Jr.'s chart, we know that we have this open document. I can select Edit, and what I'm expecting to see in the middle is at least 1 pending prescription. Because it was pending, we have 2 that are still awaiting renewal from the pharmacy, and I can tell from this workflow that whoever was working in this before hit ignore on the 2 that were pending. I'm going to end and discard this document, and then we're going to see what happens in the prescription refill area. So now Rhea Davis Jr. has 2 new and 0 pending. So by ridding ourselves of that document, the pending component goes away. From here, if I click this Start Renewal document, we'll see both of the prescription renewal requests coming in from the pharmacy here in the middle. Now, another thing about this form that we didn't address when we were looking at patient Amy Sebesta is the ability to prescribe electronically for multiple pharmacies. So if the patient has several pharmacies in their list, in their contact list, by selecting the down arrow here under patient's current pharmacy, we can select a different pharmacy. So let's see, we're at Wegmans Corporate Testing here. So let's go ahead and do CVS Caremark. So we've got 2 that are going to go to Wegmans. I want 1 at least to go to CVS Caremark. So we'll renew this Lipitor. So by simply selecting a new pharmacy, clicking Renew, now I can electronically send to multiple pharmacies. You can see CVS Caremark, the Lipitor is going there, and then these are coming in from our electronic request. And again, I know that by looking because I've got 3 icons here versus 2 icons here. If everything is ready to go within this area, I can simply end, if I am the delegate, I can end and route to a specific provider. So this routing doesn't necessarily change. One other way you could do it, I don't really like this way. I would prefer if you were going to change the provider, you would do that from the start by selecting New Document and changing it there. But you still can do this if you'd like. So I can select a different provider and select Hold Document. And the document will still be here, but it will go to the prescriber's desktop. So the prescriber, from their perspective, when they now go to Documents, so we sent that to Preethan there, in their refill request, they will see the refill that's ready to go and for their particular action. So the prescriber is still getting documents sent to them, okay, for final signature. So they are getting that workflow directly from what you have initiated here in RX Renewals if you are the delegate. Okay, so going back here to the difference in the numbers, because I know that this is kind of tricky. So remember that when we started this Rhea Davis Jr., we had 2 that were coming in from the pharmacy. Then we selected a new pharmacy and said, add Lipitor. So now we have 3 that are pending. So anytime that I see these 2 differing numbers, then I can at least understand that most likely I have addressed this particular patient, and I can move on to the next patient in the row, which has nothing in pending. So there is nothing here currently that identifies that this particular patient has essentially already been addressed. So that's my tip for you is if there is a number in new and a number in pending, and they're either the same or one number greater than all of the prescriptions have been, or multiple numbers greater, I should say. All of the prescriptions have been addressed, and it is likely awaiting the provider's final signature. So although, again, there's no icon or anything that says you've already worked this patient, that's the way that I would kind of just visually take a look at it. So, for example, I know that patient 2020, because there's one new and one pending, if we open up this patient's chart, I'm going to see this RX renewal because we've already addressed it. Okay? So once that document starts by selecting this black icon, then that's going to put that prescription here in pending. So for all of these components, this is something that's already been addressed. For patient BBB bond, there's 2 that are new, 1 pending, which probably means that when I started this document, I selected ignore on 1, and I'm only going to send out 1 document or 1 prescription. And once that particular document is signed, this number in the new column for patient BBB bond will change to 1 and 0. Okay? Some other ways that you can work this area is if you only want to address things that are new, you can certainly say, show me everything that's new, and you can sort that in ascending or descending order. The same is going to be true for pending, and the same is going to be true for, you can't sort by action, sorry about that, but you can sort here by new and pending. Other ways that you can filter in this area is by patient name. So as I start typing, you can see that the other patients go away, and I can filter down by patient name. We can also filter by request date. So if I say I want to see everything from 12/15, so show me everything from 12/15, and that's what's going to show up. Okay. Some other key components of this area, I'm going to use my folder that I created and go to CPingly, is something called unmatched patients. So unmatched patients, and I'm going to remove my request date here, unmatched patients are going to happen when there is something that is different from SureScripts about the patient versus what we have in Centricity about the patient. So that might be the date of birth, or it might be the name. There is a direct API call now from Centricity to SureScripts, and we are bypassing matching these patients in the ESM console or LinkLogic. That will all happen now here in RX renewals. And unmatched patients are identified with this broken link icon. You'll also see that they are highlighted a little bit in yellow here. And in your database, remember all of the dates of birth are going to say NA, with the exception of patients that have this broken link icon. The birth date will show. You will also see that there is nothing in new or pending, but you have these 2 different action icons. So the silhouette of the person says, I want to take a look and try to match this patient. The no smoking symbol, as I call it, is to deny the renewal. And this, you've got to be pretty careful about this button, because as soon as you select it, it goes back to the pharmacy, and it basically says, we don't know who this patient is. It's unmatched. We're denying the renewal. And there's no other function that you have to click to ensure that that's what you want to do. So careful about that one. So let's take a look to see about this patient, Dockendorf, TA. When I select Match Patient, then the Find Patient dialog box comes up. I can search by name, or I can search by date of birth. However you normally search for a patient is fine. So I'm going to search for the patient. For me, I like searching by last name. So I'm just going to search for Doc and take a look, because I can see that we've got, let's see, they told us it's just TA. Look, we've got a Tad Dockendorf here with the date of birth of 5/5/75, which looks to be the same patient. They just dropped the D at the end of that patient's name, so I can make the selection. And I want you to watch what happens as soon as I press OK. As soon as I press OK, Tad Dockendorf shows here, 5575. He has 2 prescriptions, and his icons have changed. If I am working all of the unmatched requests, one key thing that you could do is just say, only show me the unmatched patients. And it gets rid of all of the noise here on the screen for you and lets you focus specifically only on these unmatched patients. The same, though, is going to be true if you don't want to see the unmatched patients. If you say, this is not anything that I want cluttering up my view, I can just say, only show me matched patients. Okay, so these filter options here just make things a little bit easier to see. So let's take a look at this. I know is Zach Bond, but if we didn't know who this patient was, and when we went to search for that patient, we couldn't find anybody close, I can just simply say deny renewal, and poof, they're gone. So that one click, there's no confirmation that says, are you sure you want to do this? No. As soon as you click it, they're off your work driver. Okay, so let's take a look at matching a patient just one more time. When I select match patient, I can look for Seattle, and we can see they also just dropped off the Y for Sally Seattle. I'm going to take a look at her birth date here versus her birth date here. That seems to be a match. So when I make her and say OK, now all of my unmatched patients have gone away out of that particular area, and I can see that we've got Tad Dockendorf and Sally Seattle that are ready to go for prescription renewals. Okay. All right. So let's take a look again. Let's go back here. Just going back to my folder. And we will take a look at starting a prescription, let's say from a phone note. So we will pick on Rhea Davis Jr. again. I click the white icon, which opens up the patient's chart, and I can see that we have an outstanding prescription refill request. So just for the sake of the example, I'm going to go ahead and address this prescription. And because this is a controlled substance here, I have to select controlled substance acknowledgement. I'm going to complete the prescription review and enter my token password again. Enter my Centricity password. And now we've sent all of that off again. So all of that went electronically. So that electronic workflow, that's all we really need to know is what we have covered so far. There's other ways, though, that prescriptions are refilled for a patient, certainly. So perhaps you don't have electronic requests that are coming in which case you may have faxes coming in from the pharmacy, you may have telephone calls from the pharmacy, and you may have telephone calls from the patient. If that's the case, your workflow can remain essentially the same. So I can start things like a phone note. So if I take a phone call from the patient and I start a phone note, I can say call from the patient. The reason for the call is to refill medication. And say they would like to refill the Wellbutrin. So there's a couple of different ways that we can address this. We can end and route this to the provider, and they can read this and say, oh, they would like to refill their Wellbutrin, and perhaps down here in their favorites, they initiate the prescriptions form component, and they can come here and say, yes, let's go ahead and renew this. So I'll select the pharmacy, and I'll select the Wellbutrin. And as soon as I do that, now a clinical list lock is on this document because I am initiating this medication renewal. So remember, for interaction checking purposes, that's why that clinical list lock is there, is to make sure that we have one holistic view of the patient's chart and one source of truth. So that's the reason why that clinical list lock engages. So they can then end and sign the document. So I'm going to actually go through a different example of that. We can go through that kind of as we would, instead of just kind of hypothetically. So if I say, okay, phone note, call from patient to refill medication, refill Wellbutrin to CVS. If we don't have the person who's taking the phone note initiate the prescription form, then the phone note stays as a non-clinical list lock document. So if I end and I'm going to route this to a different provider, to the prescriber for that patient, and say, Andrew Primvarden needs to take a look at this. Say, okay, and hold that document. On Andrew Primvarden's desktop, they will have a phone note, just as they always have. They can open the phone note, review the summary of the call, and again, I pulled in prescriptions from my favorites. If you've never utilized favorites, it's a great tool to have, and I recommend putting the prescriptions form there just in case you need to pull it into an office visit or any other type of visit. When I select Add, I can add a form or text component, and when I add prescriptions, it's just listed here, so that's how you would do it, but mine's already there. So as the provider, when I'm ready to initiate this, I can select prescriptions, select the pharmacy, going to CVS, select Wellbutrin, and you can see here also something that happened kind of in the background. And this is something that might happen to you. So it happened here for us. So in this particular example, our Lipitor came back. So our Lipitor came back to us, and this might be something that does happen in the course of initiation for a prescription refill. So if you do have something coming back from the pharmacy or a waiting pharmacy request, you're going to see that here in the middle, even though you didn't necessarily initiate that. So it is trying to streamline the process, but you will see this happen on rare occasion if kind of the stars align for you. So you can see that we have something going here to CVS Caremark. This Wellbutrin is going to go out the door along with this Lipitor. If you're not ready to address the Lipitor, again, ignore the renewal. That will stay then in Rhea Davis Jr.'s line item in the RX renewals area. So then I can either sign the prescription now, which then makes me have to end and sign the document. So remember a couple different ways that we can end this document and sign it again. And that now goes out the door. So then we have a document that was our phone note. We have all of this information that was coming from the phone note, and then the text translation that came from the new prescriptions form component. Okay. Another way that we can initiate a refill is by simply selecting refill prescription. And so I'm expecting to see that one medication that snuck in there last time. Yep, that Lipitor is going to be right here. So we can do that as well by selecting that button at the top. It will initiate the prescriptions form component, and then anything that we have listed here would be ready to go. So I can end, hold, and route just as I always have. And by placing that document on hold, again, clinical list lock, important to understand. So when we have something that's ready to go, the system is going to lock this down. It says I need one source of truth for this medication list. So it's doing its interaction checking. That is expected behavior. Okay. So in terms of our workflow for prescription refills, I think we've hit every single option that you can think of. You can also pull in the prescription refill form when you are doing things like an office visit. So the same form is going to pull in. It performs the same way. You select a pharmacy. You can select multiple pharmacies, and based on the patient's active medication list, you select that renew button, and you can do the same function in an office visit, in a phone note, and a regular prescription refill. You can select new document and select RX refill, and if you're acting as a delegate and there is multiple prescribers for someone, this may be a workflow that you'd like to adopt. So select the encounter type and change the provider that's listed here. And that provider will hold as the authorizing provider for the document. So when you open the document, then everything is for the provider that you have listed here rather than who's logged in. So that's a behavior that's not new to Centricity either, but maybe something that you'd like to adopt as the delegate is always opening up the encounter by this method so that we can quickly choose the provider here. Going back to the chart desktop area, we did mention this other area called EPCS transmission failures. If you are utilizing EPCS, this tab is going to be for you. And in this particular tab, you can see that it's going to perform much like our other areas. We have a person who we are reviewing the transmission failures for. By selecting the magnifying glass, we can search for other providers. In this area, I can also just say, show me my doctors based on the folder that I selected and set up. And in this area, I can either open a patient chart or print a failed prescription. Now, if I do choose to print a failed electronic prescription, at the top of the printed prescription, it will say that it was printed due to a transmission failure. So that is a requirement in many states, including the state of New York. So you will see that here in EPCS transmission failures. And we've got a lot more information about EPCS, and especially this particular tab, in our EPCS training. But I do want to point that out, that this is another area where if you are working as a delegate for a provider, that if you do initiate EPCS, that you'll need to check as well. I'm going to go back to this RX renewals area and address one other item. So in Centricity, we're used to getting alerts. We're used to getting alerts here across the top for things like urgent messages, regular messages, they change colors. For RX renewals, there is currently no alert. So that is something that we have also heard loud and clear, that we need something to say, hey, I've got 16 renewals that are waiting, and that number can be listed right here, or it could be across the top. That's something we're working on in the future. If you are working as a delegate for prescribers, again, the easiest way to take a look at multiple people or just at least get to them faster is to create a folder and make the selection directly from here. Okay, so let's kind of wrap things up here. So there's a couple of things related to medications that in CPS12-2 are untouched. So these workflows that you see here, things like routing the document, that concept hasn't changed. So you will initiate the prescription refill directly from the RX renewals area, and that will then be routed to the provider for signature. That's an unchanged workflow. The new medication workflow is also untouched. In-office medication administration, immunization management, and phone notes, all of these workflows that are common for you are untouched. So looking to the future, we've heard a lot from our customers as we have gone into general availability. So I do want to revisit the fact that we at GE created this entire workflow, including the form component and the RX renewals area, in conjunction with customers. And so it's always a a group decision on what's happening. We work closely with customers, they work closely with us, and give us feedback. So now that it's in general availability, we've heard you, and that's part of the reason why we said, this is a big change for our customers. Let's create a little bit more education. So there are things that we are hearing from you that we're trying to address right away. There will be future changes to this that will enhance things, and here are just a few things that we have heard from you. A couple of references before we wrap up. Again, just to revisit, I want you to have the What's New in Centricity Practice Solution version 12.2 release notes. I want you to have those handy. Read through those. There's a ton of other new exciting things in CPS12 other than just this prescription refill workflow. So take a look at that document, read through, and take a look at all of the exciting new things in 12.2. We did create a different video, too, for what's new in CPS 12.2. There's one for chart and administration. There's also one for what's new just on the practice management side. And in the education references document that I had listed at the very beginning of this session, which is, again, notated here, you can see that we have links over to live webinars that we've done. So what's new in practice management, what's new in the chart, and what's new technical. Another suggestion for you, if you're interested in moving forward with EPCS, is to engage yourself in the EPCS community. So with that, I thank you so much for your time and attention and your willingness to take a different look at this new version of 12.2, embrace the changes, educate yourself, educate your staff, promote change management, and embrace the changes and the enhancements in this workflow. So I think with time, any type of change is hard, but with time, I think that you will see the benefits of this new RX renewals area. Again, thank you so much for your time. Have a great day.